Well, good morning to each one. I greet you in the name of Jesus. It's great to be gathered together with everyone this morning. That was been ministered to already in our Sunday school. The one thing that sort of struck me is when the people said God judged them, said, "Hey, you guys are not acting correctly," and they basically said, "Well, what have we done?" And in a short time later, they basically said, "There's no use. There's no use in following the ordinances or the commandments of God," and that's a very delusional state to be in. You say, "What have I done wrong?" But what I'm doing is worthless. And I pray that we never get there. You can turn in your Bibles to Phillipians chapter 4. I've chosen to speak on this morning. Philippians is one of my favorite books of the Bible. It's a place I end up pretty often when I'm not sure where to read. And Philippians 4 is the chapter in Philippians that I frequently read. Chapter 4 is Paul's closing remarks to the church there at Philippi. And it seems like the church of Philippi had a special place in Paul's heart. In a lot of his letters, Paul often, when he started speaking, or at the beginning of his letters, he often expressed his appreciation for people, for the work that God was doing for them, in them, and so forth. But if you look at the first chapter of Philippians, he gushes on these people a little bit. He actually gives them like 6 verses or so. Actually, it's more than that. It's 3 through 11. And I'm just going to read this briefly just to give you an idea of Paul's appreciation for these people. He says, "I thank God upon every remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine, making requests for you all with joy, for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. Just as it is right for me to think this of you all, because I have you in my heart, inasmuch as both in my change and in my defense and confirmation of the gospel, you are partakers with me of grace. For God is my witness, how greatly I long for you all with the affection of Jesus Christ. And I pray this, that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge, in all discernment." I'm going to stop there. The Philippians, the church here at Philippi, later in chapter 4, Paul talks about some of the things that they had done for him. They said they sent him a gift, and they offered a lot of support to Paul in his imprisonment. So I want to look at chapter 4, and this is sort of launching in here mid-thought a little bit in verse 1, which says, "Therefore, my beloved and longed-for brethren, my joy and my crown, so stand steadfast in the Lord, beloved." Then he addresses 2 women there in the church of Philippi in verse 2, and there seems to be a level of conflict between these two women. He says in verse 2, he says, "I implore Euodia and I implore Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. And I urge you also, true companion, to help these women who labor with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life." These are 2 people that Paul has an appreciation for, but there's a lack of seeing things the same here. And he implores them to, he says, work on this. Bring this together. Become of the same mind. But he also says, you need some competent help. Those of you that see this conflict, join in and help them resolve this. And he calls on them, on these fellow workers whose name are in the book of life. And then in verse 4, he says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice." Verse 5, "Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand." And it seems like he doesn't pick a side within this conflict, but he does give them some parameters to how to deal with this conflict. And I think in verse 4 where he says, rejoice in the Lord, and it almost seems a little bit like a random thought, like Paul's just tossing in some quick one-liners here. But I think he's giving them some parameters in conflict and how to resolve it. Rejoicing has the idea to feel or show great joy or delight. And then gentleness has the idea of being mild, forbearing, fair, or reasonable. Has the idea of being moderate, of moderation. So if you think of conflict, and if you think of a joyful, gentle, moderate person, it's hard to fight someone like that. And I think if we approach our conflict with these parameters, I think it's a good first step in resolving conflict. It's actually really frustrating to try to fight with someone that is happy. Like typically when there's conflict, it's a rather dour, stern-faced, high emotional experience. But Paul is saying, in this, rejoice. Have joy in your heart. And he doesn't just say it once, he says it twice. He says, and again, I say rejoice. He's driving this point home. You need to be joyful. In verse 6, this is one of the verse that I land on. And this is probably the point in the chapter that I'm going to focus the most on. I've entitled my talk this morning, The Antidote for Anxiety. Verse 6 says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be made known to God. I don't know what your experience has been with anxiety, or what you think anxiety is. We often think of it as fear. I connect anxiety and fear very closely, and also can be worry. But I think anxiety, to me, anxiety is a little bit more than just worry. It's something. It's a ruminating. It's a cycle. It's a circle of a sort of a bit of an obsession. Anxious. The definition of anxious is experiencing worry, unease, or nervousness, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. I find myself when I have this cycle of anxiety, many times it is on one of three things. One, and this is probably the most common one, is a fear of the future. It is something that is out of head. It is the idea of something unknown. But it also can be a conflict in the present. That can also be something like this, where there's conflict in relationships, where there's conflict in our world, in business, whatever it is. It's a point where this anxiety can start to grow and fester. And it also can be a regret for the past. I don't know about you, but sometimes I think about the time that has passed and the things that are done and that I've done, and there can be a certain amount of anxiety because it's gone and it's past and I can't redeem that time. And I'm like, what if I messed up so bad that, and I can't fix it? The one thing that is common throughout all anxiety is it is a lack of control. It tends to be something that we feel like we cannot manipulate, we cannot control it. And so it's out there, and so we worry about it. Anxiety is more than just a state of mind. If left unchecked, it also can be become very physical. Some of the effects of anxiety are a churning feeling in your stomach, feeling lightheaded or dizzy, pins and needles, restlessness, unable to sit still, If you'd have been beside me this morning, there was probably a little bit of that, not being able to sit still. Headaches, backaches, other aches and pains, fast breathing, a fast pumping or irregular heartbeat, sweating or hot flushes, sleeping problems, grinding your teeth, especially at night, nausea, panic attacks, and the list goes on. I'll confess that list is a little bit anxiety-inducing in and of itself, especially if you've experienced some of those. And so you can actually be anxious about being anxious, which makes you anxious, which is not a good situation to be in. But Paul here, in addressing this idea of anxiety, he takes it head on. He says, be anxious for nothing. This is a commandment. This is not a suggestion about, hey, don't worry about the big things, just worry about the little things. He says, don't do it about anything. I don't know about you, that's a tall order. Don't worry about anything. And Jesus also, in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, take no thought for tomorrow. Don't worry about tomorrow. And he said, it's the reason you shouldn't is 100% out of your control. You can't do anything about it. You can't even it's out of your control, so why worry about it? When someone tells you not to do something, especially on the whole idea of an anxiety, it feels a little bit hopeless in a way. I'll never forget Conrad Eby when he was here one time. He was talking about anxiety or something, or thought of your mind, and he said, if I tell you not to think of white bears, no one think of white bears for 5 minutes. You're all going to think about white bears. In fact, if I told you, I said, don't think about white bears. And then I ask you, what are you thinking about? I'm not thinking about white bears. No white bears are in my mind. It's actually impossible to do. So he follows it up with another command here in the verse. He says, don't do this. Do not worry about anything. And then he gives the commandment of what to do in order to not think about your problems or your anxieties. And he begins by saying, the first step in not worrying is prayer. I'm getting my, okay, yes. But in everything by prayer. And I often think of prayer as a conversation with God. And prayer can take on, there's many aspects of prayer. There's the aspect of worship. There's the aspect of adoration. And I'm amazed by the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray. And he begins with, he says, our Father which art in heaven, he says, hallowed be your name. The first step in this conversation with God is the acknowledgement of God's power and of his greatness. And I think that is the first step in this, in dealing with our anxiety, is coming to the understanding of who God is. It's this of a act of worship and adoration to God. And then he says, by prayer and supplication. My prayers tend to focus more on supplication and if I'm honest. And that is requesting something of God. Supplication has the idea of entreating. It's bringing your need to God. And in the Lord's Prayer, it says, "Give us this day our daily bread." It is bringing our need to God. And then he says, with thanksgiving. It's another qualifier in this prayer. Focus on what he has done. I listened to a message one time of someone speaking on this chapter, and he explained a habit that he does that I think this idea of thanksgiving or I want to say, I think it's an aspect of remembrance, that what this is. He said when he every morning when he has his quiet time, he has a journal. And he said, I write down all my problems, the things I'm facing, and I entreat God and I ask him about it. And he said, then, he said, the next day or as it goes by, he said, I go back. And he said, I then write in the answer that God gave me or the solution that God provided. And he said, anytime when I am fearful or I'm anxious, he said, I go back and I look through that of the many times that God has been there for me in these situations. And I thought that's a really, really good practice, because whenever you're in a situation where you are anxious and you have this big problem and you cry out to God, say, God, if you would fix this, if you would fix this, if you would fix this. And it's like, this would be the greatest boost to my faith ever, and I would never doubt you again, and I will always remember. That has happened many times, and they say in about 30 days, you will have forgotten what happened. And the next thing comes up, and you say, God, if you would do it this one time, this would fix it forever. This would cure my doubting. And that's why I think this idea of thanksgiving, when we come to God with this praise and this spirit of adoration, and we entreat God with our problems, we say, God, this is what I'm dealing with. I'm giving this to you. And then we say, God, you have been faithful in the past to meet my needs. And remember those things. That is the instruction here. And then in verse 7, this is the response. This is the part that God has to play. And verse 7 says, and the peace of God which passes all understanding will guard your heart and your mind through Jesus Christ. This is a favorite verse of mine. I love this. I love this picture. This is because I don't know if you ever have found yourself in that situation of being in that tumultuous point of worry and it just cringing upon you, and it feels almost like you can't escape it. This idea of God, of Christ guarding your mind is really, really a great thought. And it's going to surpass your understanding. It's going to surpass means above and beyond. Like, this is going to be greater than you can even imagine, this guarding. I don't know what you think about guarding, but this word has the idea of a sentry, someone that is looking outward. I had experience with guarding about a week ago. One of the projects I'm working on, the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, showed up to tour the project. And he came in and he walked around, and the project manager was showing him all the steps of what they're doing. It's a project that the college, Dickinson College in Carlisle, is doing, and what they're doing is they're having this basically an experiment or a program where they are taking food waste and manure, and they're putting into this tank generating methane, and they're running a generator and producing electricity. So it's this very green project, and something that is very interesting to the politicians and stuff of our day. So as Josh Shapiro was walking around, there was this group of people that were going around with him, and I wasn't really in the group. I was sort of standing back a little bit because I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be in the group or not. But there was several men that were guarding Shapiro, and the one was very, very typical bodyguard. He had a shaved head, sunglasses, a coat, and he just stood there like this. And he just looked around and had the little earbud in his ear, and he was watching. There was another man that was dressed more like everybody else, and I wouldn't have really known he was security, but he had sunglasses on as well, and he was also on the perimeter. He was just scanning, just looking around, and he also had that little wire in his ear. And so as we walked, or they walked, I was sort of trailing behind. These men were just on the fringe, just walking with us, and then we had this press conference. And so the Secretary of Agriculture was there, the president of Dickinson College, and Shapiro, and there was a couple representatives, local representatives there, and they all stand behind this podium, and they had the cameras, and they all had a little bit to say. And as we were walking, there was two SUVs that sort of just drove behind us, and then they parked when we got to this press conference, and another man climbed out as well. And so as Josh Shapiro was up there talking, they were all positioned once again on the fringe, and I was on the fringe as well, and the one guy came and stood right beside me, and he just stood there and was looking around, and I was like, I don't know why he stood beside me, but, you know, and I was standing there, I had this irrational thought of, what if I would say gun? And I was like, no, don't you dare do that. And I had to quickly banish that thought from my mind because I had this fear of, whoa, that might just slip out. But they were watching. And they were watching the crowd, but they were also just keeping an eye on they were on the peripheral, just watching, and they were guarding Shapiro to make sure that if any threat materialized, their job was to make sure it didn't get through. There was this loose perimeter around Shapiro. That's what God says, I will do for you. This is what I'll do for your heart and your mind. And it's going to be much more extravagant, much more protection than some tough guy with his sunglasses on and probably a firearm standing there scanning the crowd. He says, I will protect your heart and your mind. And that's an amazing thought. But in order to have this protection, I want to go back a little bit to our part to play in gaining this guard, this protection. When Jesus was on the earth, many times when he performed a miracle, he asked the person that he healed. Not every time. Some of them were dead. A few of them, they couldn't respond. But there was an act on their part that they had to play in their healing. He asked them to stretch forth their arm. He asked them to get up off their bed and walk. And I think, and like he told the one man, he put mud on his eyes, said, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." There was something, and that is the act of faith that God asked of each one of those persons. And I don't know if the man with the withered arm would just stood there and he's like, "Nah, I'm not trying. It's not healed yet. You know, you heal it. You make it. You make my arm stick out." I don't know. Would have he been healed? I don't know. I would actually say I don't know if he would have been. I think it required that act of faith. And when Jesus asked the one man, he said, "What do you want?" He said, "I want to see." And he said, "Do you believe that I can make you see?" And he said, "I believe, but help me with my unbelief as well." And so this structure, these steps that Paul is putting out here, is our part that we play, and is an act of faith. That when we face these anxieties, we don't just sit there and say, God help me, take it away, take it away. That's typically what I go to. He says, this is what you're supposed to do. You come to me with a heart of praise and adoration. You entreat me. You give me your care. And you be thankful and you remember what I've done for you. I see this a little bit as, I use this illustration at Bible school. I said if I would bring a table, actually I had a table, brought a folding table from upstairs and I stuck it up front here. And many of you have probably actually seen this. If you've been down at fellowship meal, like when we're cleaning up, some of the little boys like to help, right? And so if I would be down there and I would ask Cade, my little boy, I'd say, hey, Cade, carry the table, put the table away. He could go over there and he could try, but he wouldn't be able to do it. It would be a struggle. Now, if I would go to him and say, Cade, I'll help you carry the table. You get that end, I get this end. He still could try, but he still wouldn't be able to carry the table. But if I would go back 3/4 of the way, or at least halfway, and I pick up the table and just leave a little weight at the end for him, he'll be back there and he's probably barely being able to walk and struggling, but he's giving it his best effort. But he's carrying the table. But is he carrying the table? No, he's not. I'm carrying the table. But he's doing his part. And that's what God does for us. He requires our best and that we do our part. And he said, if you do your part, I will be able to supply everything beyond your imagination of what I can do for you. Biblical prayer is the antidote for anxiety. Then move on and look at verse 8. I want to call this the power of positive thinking. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are noble, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are good, are of good report, if there is any virtue or if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. I don't know what crossed your mind when I said the power of positive thinking. This is something that people say, if you believe you can, and you just got to believe. And while there's some truth to that, there's also, I push back against that whole mindset a little bit because, there are some things that no matter how much I think positively about, I won't be able to do. When I was growing up, I liked basketball, and I've always wanted to be able to dunk, just to go up, jump, and flush it. And but I can't. I can barely touch the rim. And so, but it doesn't matter how much self-talk I told myself, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. I still can't dunk. It's just I don't have the height, and I don't have the jump for it either, the vertical. But I want to think about this positive thinking that Paul is laying out here in the scriptures. And this is not just, I want you to think about this not just in relation to fear. I want you to also think about this in relation to your thoughts in general. I want you to think about this week as we look over this a little bit. Paul has all these attributes or these things he brings out here as far as the filter that we put our thoughts through. And I'm not going to go into detail on all of them. I'm going to hit a couple, and because a lot of them overlap quite a bit, and I feel like I would say the same thing over and over again. And I want to focus on the first one, and it's the whatever things are true. And when you're facing anxiety or fears, it is normally based on what if, and on the what ifs, it's the unknown, and it's actually outside of reality. Reality is the world or the state of things as they actually exist. That's what reality is. Truth is in accordance with facts or reality. It's what is. So I want you to think about your thoughts and putting it through this filter. I once watched a video of someone testing filters, and they had, probably half a dozen filters, and they took a bottle of Coke, and they put it in these filters, and then they left it go through, and they judged how well the filter performed by what was left after they filtered. And it was amazing. Some of them, you poured Coke in, it looked like Coke came out. And so you're like, definitely don't buy that one. And as they worked through, some of them took out, there was less color and less color and less color. But there was one machine, I think it was a reverse osmosis machine. It was amazing. They poured Coke in. You know how dark Coke is. And the water, when it had this clear reservoir, and when the water came out, it was 100% clear. It took it all out. It's like, wow, that's the one you should buy, right? And and so I want you to think about this as the filter that our thoughts are supposed to go through. This is the quality control, okay? And this is the reverse osmosis of thought. This is, if you pay attention to what it's saying here, it's rather daunting in a way of all these, of what Paul is asking here. So I want you to think about truth as it is the reality of what is, okay? But I also want you to think about truth and how we think about situations and circumstances. One thing that I faced often is how I think about other people, all right? And a lot of my thinking, when I'm thinking about other people, is based on assumption. Assumption is a thing that is accepted as true or certain to happen without proof. I'm going to use another word here, the word intuition. Intuition is actually something I like. I don't know. To me, I hope I'm intuitive. I like to think I'm intuitive. It's this whole idea of being able to look at somebody or something and figure out on your own what is the truth or what is the reality of the situation. And so I always thought of intuition as a good thing. Some people say a gut. It's your gut feeling. I looked up the definition of intuition, and it altered the value I place upon intuition a little bit. This is what the definition says: using or based on what one feels to be true, even without conscious reasoning. I was like, wow, that feels a little susceptible to failure. But I feel like this is a lot of times in my thoughts, and when I think about situations, and especially people, this is what I do. I was in a conversation with someone recently. It's actually been a little while, and I was on the other side of this. They were assuming something about me, and they asked me a question, and the way they ask it, I'm like, I was like, he's relying on his intuition, and he's probably very intuitive. I'm not going to judge that, but the thing that was interesting when I answered, his intuition wasn't, in my opinion, wasn't quite correct. But when I answered him, he didn't hear what I said. He heard just one small part of what I said. He just heard the part that affirmed his assumption of the question. And it wasn't a big deal. It was a very minor thing. But I walked away from it, and I'm like, he still thinks exactly what he thought when he asked me. But he didn't listen to what I was saying. And so many, many times, that's this thing of assumption. It is judging or putting the truth as something without putting stock or creating a truth without proof. And I was really, really convicted of my thoughts in this situation. Are they true? Are they actually factually based in my intuition and my assumption of other people? He goes on to say, then he be noble. Reverent. Noble has the idea of being reverent or serious. Just, being right or correct. This overlaps, like I said, it overlaps with being of truth. Pure, free from contamination. This is another big one. This is the whole idea of purity. Think of that Coke coming out as clean water. Are our thoughts clean? Especially us men, we fight this. We know what it is. We know what impurity is in thought life. It's supposed to be lovely, pleasing, agreeable, of good report, spoken of in a kindly spirit, laudable, reputable. If there's any virtue has the idea of goodness, of graciousness. If it's praiseworthy, it's worthy of commendable, or it's approved. He says to meditate on these things. Meditate has the idea of focusing deeply, to think deeply. We have the meditation is actually something that a lot of people try to do these days, and it's this whole idea of sitting, you have all these, you can get apps and stuff that this whole idea of meditating, thought control, and things like that. And I don't know, I've never done a guided meditation, but this, I think Paul is laying out the correct way to meditate here. And he said, think on these things that are true, these things that are pure, lovely, of good report. This is what is supposed to consume your mind. This is rather daunting. I was trying to analyze my thoughts over the past week. and put them through this filter. If I would have done that, I would have thought of very, very little this week, to be honest. Like, if I took all my thoughts, I was able to set my thoughts right here, and I would put them through this process of filtration, what would be left? How much of it was holy? How much of it was pure? How much of it was true, factually based? How much of it was actually based on reality? This is hard work. It's not easy. I want to give a couple practical things I've been thinking about as far as in my relation to my thoughts. What are things practical I can do to help with this filtration process? And I want to think a little bit about what I feed on. Think about your input, all right? Input, what you allow into your life is actually really, really important. Because the less polluted the material is that you put in, the easier it is to filter, right? And so I think that's the first step in filtering our thoughts, is being aware and paying very close attention to our input. And this is one of the things that is one of the challenges we face of our time, is the amount of input that we have. It's unbelievable the amount of information and input we can have. And it's not all bad. A lot of it can be bad. A lot of it does not fit these parameters. And I'm someone that I like to listen to things. I have various apps. I like podcasts. I like books. And I listen to a lot. And it can be a way of distraction. It can just be noise at times. Sometimes I glean a little bit. But I've had to really start filtering what I listen to. And I had to think about, sometimes it's easy to listen to something and it's noise. It's a little bit interesting. But I've had to focus on it and put it up against this filter and say, is it true? Is it pure? Is it of good report? Is it virtuous? And if it's not, is it helpful for me to put this in my life? What we listen to is just one aspect. I mean, there's many things that we have input. I just want to encourage you in that when you in your life, that doesn't mean you need to listen to the Bible all the time or anything like that. I'm not don't hear that. But I think it is important for us to filter the things that we're putting in and saying, is it helpful? Is it good for us? And I found it been very helpful for me when I purify my input, my thoughts and all that. It's much more easier to keep in these guidelines of our thoughts when what I'm putting into me is correct. We can't do this on our own. This whole idea of thought, of controlling our mind and things like that. God says that we're supposed to, that in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 4 and 5, it says, "For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God, for the pulling down of strongholds, casting down every argument and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity into the obedience of Christ." This whole idea of purifying our thoughts, like I said, or not being anxious. It's a high calling. Like I said, it looks rather daunting to me. But if we do our part, the promises of God are there. He said, "I will give you what you need to bring our thoughts into the captivity, into the obedience of Christ." I want to end with verse 13 and 19 and 20 here in chapter 4. As an encouragement, as we face the anxieties, as we face the impurities and the things that rage on our souls, or that press in our minds. Verse 13, Paul says, he was talking about, let me look here so I say it correctly. He was talking about being content and things like that. And he says, in verse 13, he says, "I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And then verse 19. And my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. Now to our God and Father be glory forever and ever. Amen. Thank you for your attention this morning. I had a lot of difficulty coming up or landing on the right thing to speak on this morning. Back in my office, I probably have at least 4 starts that all became stops. And in the end, I ended up on this because I wasn't preaching at you this morning. I was preaching at myself. Because this is a battle that I face. The whole thing of anxiety and things like that, it's been something that I have to be very honest with myself of, am I availing myself of the promises of God and what he has asked of me to do, and also in my thought life. This is not optional. This is a commandment that we bring our thoughts into subjection, and that we think on things that are pure, that are holy, and that are true. And I hope that it can also be an encouragement to you. Is there any response?